During Augustus's reign, a man who would change the world was born in the Roman-occupied city of Bethlehem, Jesus Christ. The Gospel of Luke says, "In those days a decree went out from Caesar Augustus that all the world should be registered." This was the first registration when Quirinius was governor of Syria, and all went to be registered, each to his own town. Luke 2:1-3. This census was an essential factor in Roman society because it established the population counts in these various communities, making it possible to tax these various citizens. So the highly pregnant Mary and her betrothed husband Joseph had to travel 90 miles on foot from Nazareth to Bethlehem to complete this legally required Roman census. When they arrived in Bethlehem, many other descendants of the King of David, or members of the Jewish faith, were also going to Bethlehem for the census. They found out that there was no room for them in the inn, so they were forced to take shelter in a stable where Mary named King of the Jews. After Jesus' birthday and the completion of the census, their extraordinary son. As the years as their Messiah, they claim that he can catch an endless amount of fish. They claim that he can cure the blind, and they claim that he was the Son of God. So these followers, specifically his disciples, started to write down his entire life journey. 4 of his closest disciples, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, wrote down the main chunks of the book in these parts called Gospels. Each of these Gospels covered almost all of the same events, the narrative life of Jesus Christ. This narrative testimony of a child born in a stable changed the world forever. Even though many loved Jesus, some viewed him as a threat. Emperor Tiberius succeeded Augustus and reigned from 14 AD to 37 AD. Tiberius was notorious for his delators, a network of informants rewarded for spying and reporting on suspected traitors and criminals. Criminals reported on by the delators had to face a treason trial, often resulting in executions or forced suicides. His prefect of Judea at the time, Pontius Pilate, was no stranger to the harsh punishment of traitors. As Jesus was influencing more and more people, he became more of a political threat. So, following the guidelines of Emperor Tiberius, Pilate was given no practical political choice other than to execute Jesus on the cross. Roman law was evident then. One must follow the emperor's will or else they will perish. As Jesus was crucified on the cross, a new religion was born: Christianity. In the beginning, Christianity was just a small sect of Judaism. Nevertheless, its growth would be unparalleled. Paul of Taurus would take the word of his chosen Lord across the known world. From Greece to Turkey to Syria, the word of Jesus Christ spread. His missionary tales are now documented in the New Testament as the Book of Acts. The more Paul went to different places, the more followers he gained. On the same token, it created more enemies. The divide between monotheism and polytheism was on the rise. It was beginning to get a lot tougher for Romans to accept a religious population that didn't believe in gods like Mars and Jupiter. So when the Great Fire of Rome occurred in July of 64 AD, Emperor Nero quickly blamed it on the Christians. The Great Fire was an event that destroyed 2/3 of the city of Rome. So, in order to pay for these massive repairs, Nero instituted heavy tributes across the empire. To meet at least a proportion of the costs, Nero also started to print more Roman currency, creating an inflationary effect for the first time in the empire's history. However, the individuals who lived under Roman rule, which wasn't in Rome proper, were upset by this new policy. So, in the holy city of Jerusalem in 66 AD, a revolt was on. At first, the first Jewish revolt succeeded, and the Jewish forces quickly expelled the unprepared Roman army. Then, the rebels gained some traction in the neighboring villages in Galilee. In response, the Roman Emperor Nero sent the general Vespasian to meet the Jewish forces. an endeavor that pushed most rebels into Jerusalem proper by the time Vespasian was proclaimed emperor in 69 CE. Then, around Passover in 70 AD, Vespasian and his forces sieged the city, depleting it of food and water within the walls of Jerusalem. The Jews started to quarrel within, leaving them more vulnerable to attack. By August, the Romans breached the defenses, killed much of the population, and destroyed many of their holy sites. With the Jews decimated, the strength of polytheism lived long. Then, in 98 to 117 AD, under Emperor Trajan, the Roman Empire was able to expand its greatest territorial extent, spanning all the way from modern-day Britain to the Persian Gulf. Roman rule was everywhere. Well, except for in the Americas, because the Romans didn't even know they existed. In the Americas, we can see the growth of various civilizations across the Andes located in modern-day Peru and Chile. The Mochi civilization was able to build monumental structures, like the Huaca del Sol and Huaca de la Luna, impressive pyramids that were the center of their religions. They also created advanced fertilization techniques that used bird droppings as fertilizer. Their highly centralized government made everyone know their place in society. While a little bit more south, the Nazca civilization is one enthralled in mystery. The people of Nazca created a series of large-scale geoglyphs consisting of hundreds of individual figures, including geometric shapes, animals, and human-like figures, by removing the dark reddish-brown iron oxide-coated pebbles covering the surface of the Nazca Desert. These lines are now called Nazca Lines, the purpose of which is still unknown to this day and subject to conspiracy theory today. Around 100 AD, the Zapotecs started establishing Monte Alban, their capital. It was one of the first examples of urban planning in the Americas. The city was laid out in a grid pattern, with main roads and smaller side streets leading to plazas and public buildings. The city was also divided into different districts, each with specialized functions, such as residential, administrative, and religious, leaving it to be in use for 1,000 years after that. While back in Rome, after the end of Trajan's reign in 117 AD, a new emperor with a purpose was in hand. Hadrian was a man tasked with a near impossible, keeping the massive Roman Empire under one rule. He first had to deal with a crisis with the newly colonized Roman Britain. Like their predecessors in Judea, the Roman Brits did not like being Roman, so they started to cause unrest, and in the eyes of Hadrian, a real threat of revolution was on his mind. So Hadrian had ordered a massive wall, aptly named Hadrian's Wall, which spanned almost coast to coast, keeping it sunk in the conquered people's minds that the Romans were here, staving off revolution in one region. However, in Galilee, things weren't as peaceful. Simon Bar Kokhba led a rebellion of the Jewish people to free themselves from Roman rule. As you see, Rome was developing a new city called Aelia Capitolina over the ruins of Jerusalem from the last revolt, with temples dedicated to polytheistic gods like Jupiter. By 132, Bar Kokhba took the bottle of Nasi, head of state. Many Jews regarded him as the Messiah who would save the Jewish people and restore their independence. Kokhba's troops would storm Aelia Capitolina, almost knocking out entirely the Roman garrison controlling the city. Hadrian, though, would not have it, so he sent a force of 120,000 men to the lands of Judea to conquer and force the Jewish people into submission. As Cassius Dio says in the History of Rome, 50 of their most important outposts and 985 of their most famous villages were razed. 580,000 men were slain in the various raids and battles, and the number of those that perished by famine, disease, and fire was past finding out. Thus, nearly the whole of Judea was made desolate. History of Rome 69.14, 1-2. Rome made it clear that it was not to be taken lightly. While in China, the message was quite different. The ideas of Buddhism were spreading, along with the Chinese philosophies of Confucianism and Taoism, and built a dynasty. These three philosophies worked together to make the Han Dynasty stronger and more united in many ways. While in America, the Mayan architects went across northern Petén and designed a series of short, broad temples with wide staircases flanked by enormous stucco masks. These stucco masks were made of plaster, and some burned and powdered limestone. The Mayans built these stone armatures into elaborate deity faces to capture the soul of the gods and bring it to the people. A temple like the E7 sub, yes, historians name Mayan temples like military submarines, is a pyramid with 16 stucco masks. Each allows us to go deeper into the souls of these deities of the past. In the Middle East, a new empire was emerging with roots in the past. A man named Ardashir claimed to have royal blood that traced all the way back to Cyrus the Great. Ardashir claimed that he should be the true ruler of the Persian Empire, not those frauds of the Parthians. Ardashir was able to unite the various tribes of Persia. In 224 AD, Ardashir I led his forces against the Parthian king Artabanus V in a significant battle at Hormozgan. The Sasanian forces, known for their cavalry, defeated the Parthians and captured Artabanus V. With this victory, Ardashir I declared himself king and established the Sasanian Empire. Ardashir I quickly established a centralized government and built a new capital at Ctesiphon on the Tigris River. He re-established the Zoroastrian religion, which had been suppressed by the Parthians, as the empire's official religion. He also built a powerful military machine with skilled cavalry and archers. He began to expand his territory by conquering neighboring regions. As the Parthians were on their way out, so were the Han. The Han dynasty's downfall was marked by political instability, economic problems, external threats, internal rebellions, and power struggles. The weakening of central authority allowed regional warlords to seize power, and the government's attempts to address economic issues were unsuccessful. External threats and rebellions weakened the dynasty even further. A warlord named Cao Pi declared himself emperor and established the Wei dynasty, officially ending the Han dynasty. While back in Rome, Emperor Diocletian, 284–305, faced a problem. Rome was becoming too large and impossible to manage. So Diocletian created the Tetrarchy and divided the region into 4, where each region was governed by a separate emperor. Within the Tetrarchy, there were 2 types of emperors, Augustus and Caesars. Diocletian chose Maximian to be his equal to Augustus. In contrast, Galerius and Constantius were appointed to be Caesars. However, this system created uncontrolled chaos and anarchy. Each emperor had desires for power and ambition, and it all came to a head in 305 when power shifted. Both Diocletian and Maximian retired, and in 306, Constantius died. 3 out of the 4 original leaders were left out of the system, leading to a power vacuum to come. Emperor Constantine the Great was appointed by his father's army unilaterally as an Augustus and a Caesar at the same time to replace his father. At the same time, Maximin's son Maxentius felt as though he should have been appointed Caesar instead of Valerius Severus. So in 307, Maxentius sent his army and forced Valerius Severus to surrender. Come 308, Galerius appointed Licinius to replace him. So on the west side of Rome, 2 emperors wanted to rule. Constantine ruled over Gaul and Britain, and Maxentius ruled Italy and North Africa. Maxentius had a difficult time consolidating his power, and he faced increasing resistance from the people of Rome. To try and secure his hold on power, Maxentius ordered the construction of a new bridge across the Tiber River near Rome, known as the Milvian Bridge. Constantine saw Maxentius as a threat to his power, so he decided to march on Rome to confront him. As the two armies approached each other near the Milvian Bridge, Constantine had a vision of a cross in the sky, with the words, "In this sign, conquer." Some accounts suggest that this vision may have been a dream or a hallucination, while others suggest that it may have been a sign from God. Regardless of the nature of the vision, Constantine took it as a sign that he would be victorious in battle if he fought under the sign of the Christian cross. He had his soldiers paint this symbol on their shields and banners, and he went into battle with renewed vigor and confidence. The battle was fierce and brutal, with both sides suffering heavy losses. Maxentius had a larger army, but his troops were spread out and disorganized. Constantine was able to take advantage of this, and he was able to push Maxentius's forces back towards the Tiber River. In the chaos of the retreat, Maxentius was forced off the Milvian Bridge and into the water, where he drowned. Shortly after his victory, Constantine met Licinius at Mediolanum, modern Milan, to confirm several political and dynastic arrangements to produce the Edict of Milan. This edict gave power for Eastern Rome to Licinius and Constantine's sole power of the West. More importantly though, this document extended religious tolerance for Christians and restored any properties confiscated from them during the persecution. However, the peaceful coexistence of both rulers was short-lived. Though the edict allowed for the safety of Christians, Licinius was still very much a paganist. Their differences started to grow. All came near the city of Chrysopolis in 324 AD, where both armies went and fought. Constantine's military might was on display. He was able to force the Eastern Roman army towards the sea, leaving many to be killed or captured. Constantine was declared the sole leader of Rome, and Licinius was declared dead by hanging. He renamed the Eastern Roman capital from Byzantium to Constantinople to celebrate his victory. Then in 325 AD, Constantine presided over the First Council of Nicaea, when the 300 bishops established the now famous Nicene Creed, which declared that Jesus Christ was begotten, not made, and of one substance with the Father. Constantine was finally baptized as a Christian on his deathbed in 337 AD. Come 370 AD, a new player was on the scenes. The Huns were a barbaric nomadic civilization who were masters of warfare. According to legends, they were taught horsemanship as early as the age of 3. Also, they would attack their own with a sword to teach them how to endure pain. These people weren't to be messed lightly with. When they crossed the Volga River in 370 on their horses and lusted for blood, the Alan civilization didn't stand much chance. 2 years later, they attacked the Ostrogoths, an eastern tribe of Germanic Goths who harassed the Roman Empire by frequently attacking their territories. By 376, the Huns had attacked the Visigoths, the western tribe of Goths, and forced them to seek sanctuary within the Roman Empire. As the Huns dominated Goth and Visigoth lands, they earned a new reputation as the new barbarians in town and seemed unstoppable. By 395 AD, they began invading Roman domains, and some Roman Christians believed they were devils who arrived straight from hell. The reason they started invading Rome was because of the death of Theodosius the Great. His shining achievement as emperor was keeping the Goths and the Huns at bay. But on death, he decided to follow the ideas of Diocletian and split the empire up again, splitting up control between his two sons, Arcadius in the east and Honorius in the west, making Theodosius the last leader of a united Rome. With Honorius in charge, the incapable general made Western Rome an easy target to be bullied. The Visigoths, looking for a new place to live, had their eyes set on Rome. So throughout the early 410s, the Visigoths ransacked various Roman cities. Then, on August 24th, 410, the Visigoths sacked Rome, taking control of this historic city. It was the first time in nearly 800 years that a foreign army occupied the city of Rome. However, the Visigoths couldn't maintain control of Rome. Instead, they continued to ransack Roman territories until they established their kingdom in 418 in modern-day Spain. While the prospects of existence weren't so much better in Eastern Rome, the notorious Attila the Hun was gaining power, and his brutal tactics called him the Scourge of God. After a failed peace attempt in 441, Attila and his army stormed through the Balkans and the Danube frontier. Another peace treaty was forged in 442, but Attila attacked again in 443, killing, ransacking, and pillaging his way to the well-fortified city of Constantinople. However, due to Constantinople's high walls, Attila couldn't conquer it. Instead, Attila was able to muster another peace agreement. He would leave Constantinople alone in exchange for an annual tribute of 2,100 pounds of gold, a staggering sum. Then in 451, the Huns invaded the Gauls, allowing the once enemies of the Visigoths and the Romans to wise up and work together to fight the Huns. According to legend, the night before the imminent battle, Attila consulted sacrificed bones and saw that thousands of his army would fall in the fight. The next day, his premonition came true. In the Battle of the Catalonian Plains, after hours of ferocious fighting, tens of thousands of soldiers lay dead, giving Attila his first and only military defeat in history. However, even after the loss, Attila and his army marched on and returned to Italy, continuously ravaging the cities. In 452, with Rome in sight, he met Pope Leo I, who acted as an emissary between Attila and Rome. There's no record of what they discussed. Still, according to legend, the apparitions of St. Paul and St. Peter appeared to Attila. They threatened to kill him if he didn't negotiate with Pope Leo I. Attila decided to pull out of Italy and return to the Great Hungarian Plain, whether because of his fear of the Pope and his saintly allies, or because of his troops were stretched too thin and weakened by malaria. However, the struggle for Western Rome wasn't over. In 476 AD, the young Emperor Romulus Augustus had trouble keeping power for himself, as many Romans felt he was illegitimate. So the Eastern Roman Empire sent the Germanic general Odoacer and his mercenaries to suppress a revolt by the Roman army in the region. However, instead of supporting the Eastern Roman Empire, Odoacer saw an opportunity to seize power for himself. He turned against the Roman government and deposed the last Western Roman emperor, Romulus Augustus, effectively marking the end of the Western Roman Empire. As the steps of his victory, Odoacer was declared the King of Italy. However, Odoacer's victory was short-lived, because in 493, Theodoric the Great of the Ostrogoths, with the support of Eastern Roman Emperor Zeno, came in and created the Ostrogothic Kingdom of Italy, sending Odoacer to meet his fate. While Europe was in the crux of a dark age, India, under the Gupta Empire, was in a mathematical golden age. Great mathematicians like Brahmagupta started using zero as a placeholder and as various solutions for mathematical equations. The astronomer Aryabhata was able to calculate the circumference of the Earth. He proved the world was round long before it was globally accepted. Aryabhata was also able to develop methods for calculating pi and square roots. However, his crowning achievement was creating the concept of an asymptote, which is a line that approaches the curve but never touches it. The Franks under Clovis I had been engaged with the Alemanni, another Germanic tribe, and tensions between the two groups were running high. In 496 AD, in the Battle of Tolbiac, Clovis I led his forces into battle against the Alemanni, with both sides eager to gain the upper hand in the ongoing struggle for power and territory. As the Alemanni began to push the Franks to defeat, in a moment of desperation, Clovis called out to the Christian god for assistance, promising to convert to Christianity if he emerged victorious. According to legend, a sudden thunderstorm appeared, and the Franks could regroup and launch a successful counterattack against the Alemanni. The battle ended in a decisive victory for the Franks, and Clovis kept his promise and converted to Christianity, officially cementing Christianity to the forefront and birthing the Frankish kingdom. While the Western Roman Empire might have fallen, in the East, the Roman Empire was changing. Many historians argue that the Eastern Roman Empire, based out of Constantinople, should be considered a part of Rome. However, it is undeniable that under Justinian I would lead the eastern half into its next chapter in life, the Byzantine Empire. Whether it's a continuation of the Roman Empire before is a debate for another under. Under the leadership of Justinian I, like many Roman emperors before him, he would expand the Byzantine Empire to reach places such as Italy, North Africa, and even Spain. He also commissioned a team of legal scholars to codify all the laws of the Roman Empire, known as the Corpus Juris Civilis, which became the basis of the European laws we know today. He also commissioned the world-renowned Hagia Sophia in Constantinople, where this beautiful cathedral, adorned with intricate mosaics and marble decorations, became the head of the Eastern Orthodox Church. However, Jesus wasn't the only prophet at the time. In the small town of Mecca, a nomadic tribe called the Quraysh gave birth to a man who would change the religious world yet again: Muhammad. Muhammad was orphaned at an early age and was raised by his grandfather and later his uncle. As he grew up, he worked as a merchant, which earned him the nickname Al-Amin, meaning the trustworthy. On one of his pilgrimages in 610, Muhammad meditated in a cave on Mount Jabal Nur. The angel Gabriel appeared and relayed the word of God. Recite in the name of your Lord who creates a man from a clot. Recite, for your Lord is most generous, became the opening verses of Surah, chapter 96 of the Quran. At first, Muhammad was reluctant, not knowing how to disclose this information. However, soon enough, Muhammad began to gather a small following, which was mocked by the pagans of Mecca. However, when Muhammad denounced idol worship, the leader of Mecca knew that he was through. So through the resistance from Mecca, Muhammad and his followers were eventually forced to emigrate to Medina, a city 260 miles away. There, Muhammad was instrumental in ending various civil wars, creating a prosperous Muslim community. Nevertheless, this prosperity would be challenged by the members of Muhammad's old tribe, the Quraysh and their allies, who marched up to Medina with a large army to attack the Muslims. Muhammad devised a plan that they could defend the city if they dug a trench around its perimeter, making it near impossible for enemy forces to penetrate. For several weeks, the Quraysh tried to break through the trench, trying yet again. Eventually, strong wind and heavy rain caused the Quraysh forces to abandon the siege, marking the Muslims as victorious. In 630, the Muslim army marched into Mecca, taking the city with minimum casualties. Muhammad gave amnesty to the enemy leaders who once opposed him, converting most of the Meccan population to Islam. At the time of Muhammad's death, the Muslims had successfully united the Arabian Peninsula under the banner of Islam. After Muhammad's death, a series of caliphs or leaders took over the leadership of the Muslim community, beginning with Abu Bakr, a close companion of the Prophet. Under the leadership of the caliphs, the Muslim community continued to expand its territory, conquering new lands and spreading the message of Islam. At first, Abu Bakr had his eyes set on the Byzantine Empire's provinces of Syria, taking over the crucial cities of Damascus and Jerusalem. Then in 636, the Arab forces invaded the Sassanid Empire, taking over their capital city in 637, marking the end of the Sassanid Empire. Onward to Egypt they went, where after years of fighting, they successfully defeated the Byzantine to take over the city of Alexandria in 642 AD, economically crippling the Byzantines. By 716, the Arab forces had conquered much of North Africa, Carthage, and Spain. so that by 716, the Arabs had an extensive empire from Lisbon to China. After consolidating their hold on the Iberian Peninsula, the Arabs launched raids into neighboring Francia, modern-day France. In 732 AD, they launched a significant invasion to expand their territory northward. The Arabs' forces, led by Emir Abdul Rahman al-Ghafiqi, quickly conquered several cities in the region, including Bordeaux and Tours. However, Charles Martel, the military leader of the Franks, assembled a large army to meet the Arabs in battle. The Battle of Christianity versus Islam. Both empires wanted to keep their own faith. The Arabs wanted to impose their religion onto the Franks. The two forces clashed near Tours on October 10, 732 AD. The battle was fierce and lasted several days, with both sides suffering heavy casualties. In the end, though, Charles Martel and the Franks emerged victorious, and the Arab forces were forced to retreat back to Spain, ending the massive expansion of the Arabic Empire. While in the West, the definition of God was war. In China, during the rule of the Tang, religions like Buddhism, Taoism, and Confucianism all coexisted peacefully. A citizen was able to believe what they wanted to believe, leaving for many temples and pagodas to be built across the empire. Also, during the Tang, the height of Chinese poetry was upon us. Poets like Li Po and Du Fu created poems that later became the foundations of Chinese literature. Li Po wrote a poignant poem called Zanzan on the Qingthing Mountain, translated by Sam Hamill. The birds have vanished down the sky, now the last cloud drains away. We sit together, the mountain and me, until only the mountain remains. Charlemagne, also known as Charles the Great, became the king of the Franks in 768. Charlemagne was a skilled military leader who expanded the Frankish Empire through successful campaigns. He conquered much of Western Europe, including modern-day France, Germany, Italy, and Spain. Charlemagne was also a devout Christian and worked to spread Christianity throughout his empire. In 785, Harun was declared caliph instead of focusing on conquering like his brethren. He instead focused on the scientific growth in the new capital city of Baghdad. Harun al-Rashid wanted to create the House of Wisdom, a library and research center that attracted scholars from around the world. These scholars would come to the House of Wisdom with the desire to learn. They've translated the works of the past, as well as developing the science of algebra, chemistry, sociology, and the concept of infinity. While the Vikings had a different idea of progress. The Vikings were a group of uncivilized pagans from modern-day Scandinavia who wanted to gain material wealth. So June 8, 793 AD marked the beginning of the Viking Age in Europe. Lindisfarne was a small, isolated island off the northeast coast of England that was home to a famous monastery and considered one of Europe's most important centers of learning. On the day of the raid, a group of Viking warriors, likely from Norway or Denmark, landed on the island and attacked the monastery. The Vikings pillaged the monastery, killing many monks and taking others as slaves. The raid was a brutal and unexpected attack on a place of great religious and cultural significance, and it sent shockwaves throughout Europe. In 799, in Rome, Pope Leo III was attacked by a faction of Rome who believed that the Pope was guilty of tyranny and serious personal misconduct. So Pope Leo III ran away to the Frankish kingdom. After this, Charlemagne and his Frank army provided an escort for the Pope and restored him to the papal office. But yet, the power of the papacy was being questioned, with many people wanting it to go away, which caused Charlemagne to go to Rome in late 800 to fight for his pope. For his loyalty, on Christmas Day in the Basilica of St. Peter, Pope Leo III placed a crown on Charlemagne's head, declaring him the new Holy Roman Emperor, creating a new Roman Empire, the Holy Roman Empire. or at least the first rendition of it. Under Charlemagne, the foundations of a genuinely great empire were forming, but once Charlemagne died in 814, the new empire was bludgeoning with problems. His son, Louis the Pious, 788 to 840, inherited an empire filled with problems. Many of his own citizens viewed him as a strong Catholic who was well-intentioned but was incredibly weak and unable to do anything. As the Vikings continued their raids along the Rhine River, attacking Holy Roman Empire cities such as Cologne, Trier, and Mainz, raiding various Catholic monasteries, and destroying religious artifacts caused fear and hatred among his citizens. Why would anyone trust a leader if they can't stop barbaric pagans? So, various local leaders started to focus on defending their land, rather than relying on the central government for defense. Hence beginning the process of independently recreating the Chinese system of feudalism. At this time, people would willingly farm on lands, giving up their freedom to these local leaders to protect them from the Vikings, creating the basis of a new system of feudalism. While the Holy Roman Empire might have been fighting with the Vikings and the Byzantines were fighting with the Arabs, in 820, a group of Arab raiders landed on the island of Crete. Over the next several years, Arab forces gradually gained control of the island, overcoming the resistance of the Byzantine defenders. The conquest was completed in 827, and Crete became part of the Arab Empire. The conquest of Sicily and Sardinia followed a similar pattern. In 827, a large Arab fleet landed on Sicily, and Arab forces quickly gained control of much of the island. They then moved on to Sardinia, which fell to the Arab invaders in 828. In the Holy Roman Empire, once Louis the Pious died in 840 AD, so did the Charlemagne Empire. The infighting between family members grew, leading to the Holy Roman Empire being divided between three family members in the famous Treaty of Verdun. In the west, the formation of the West Frankish Kingdom was given to Charlemagne's grandson, Charles the Bald, in modern-day France. In the East Frankish Kingdom was given to another grandson, Louis the German, which was obviously settled in modern-day Germany, while the Middle Kingdom was given to Charlemagne's eldest son, Lothair. However, being squeezed in between the West and East Frankish kingdoms gave the Middle Kingdom a short lifespan and was practically irrelevant. The Vikings weren't just a problem for mainland Europe, they were pillaging everything in mainland England. So in 871, the new king of Wessex, Alfred the Great, rose to power with one thing in mind: keeping everyone safe. Alfred built a network of fortifications known as burhs, designed to protect his people from Viking attacks. He also developed new military tactics and strategies and fostered alliances with other Anglo-Saxon kingdoms. Unlike in Great Britain, though, the Vikings were actually invited to Russia. According to Russian legend, the tribes in Russia were tired of dealing with political strife, so they invited the Varangians, a sect of Vikings, to establish order and a government over there. Hence, Rurik came with his two brothers to the city of Novgorod, and using the Vikings' famous force, they were able to establish order in the city, declaring Rurik as their new king, creating the Kievan Rus dynasty. Under the military leadership of Oleg, one of the Rurik kingsmen, the Kievan Rus started establishing Smolensk and Kiev in modern-day Ukraine, creating the forefront of Russia today. While back in England, expanding upon his grandfather Alfred the Great's alliance network, Athelstan was declared King of Essex. Athelstan was able to get all the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms to work together to fend off the Vikings of the British Isles. He was declared to be the first king of England due to his ability to navigate alliances and keep everyone safe, beginning one of the longest monarchies in human history. While the East Frankish Kingdom was facing a similar problem, the pagan Magyars were attacking everyone across the kingdom, leaving the kingdom to live in fear. However, King Otto of the East Frankish Empire was able to defeat the pesky Magyars at the Battle of Lechfeld in 955. Then, in 961, he could fully conquer all of the kingdoms of Italy, restoring Christendom to all the former pagans. So in 962, Otto I was coronated to Pope John XII in Rome to be the new Holy Roman Emperor. In France, though, the West Frankish kingdom was struggling, because in 987, King Louis V, a direct descendant of Charlemagne, died at age 20 without leaving an heir to take over their dynasty, leaving the French monarchy in peril. So, the French aristocracy had an election between Hugh Capet, a noble with extensive lands in the region of Isle-de-France, and Charles, Duke of Lower Lorraine. With the support of Adalbero, the Archbishop of Reims, Hugh Capet became the first king of France, starting the Capetian dynasty. However, at this time, the typical person in Europe was always living in fear. Every civilization was on the verge of conquering. They've all become land-hungry and were willing to fight for it. So across Europe at this time, every civilization started to entrench their society in the ideas of feudalism, leading to another social pyramid. At the bottom lay the serfs. Their job was to farm the land and ensure everyone was fed. Then came the knight, who provided protection for the people. Then came the nobles, who ruled over a specific territory, owning the land. Then came the kings, as previously mentioned, who gave lands to the nobles. But all the way at the top was the Pope, because the Pope could speak directly to God, and had God-given ownership of all the lands. In the early 11th century, Leif Erikson was sent on a voyage to discover lands west of Greenland. If you look at a map, west of Greenland is the Americas. So Leif and his crew ventured to this new mystical land called Vinland, in modern-day Newfoundland, Canada. Leif and his crew spent the winter in Vinland, establishing a small settlement and trading with the local indigenous people. They also explored the surrounding area, which they found rich in natural resources, including timber, fish, and game. Leif and his crew returned to Greenland in the spring, where they were greeted as heroes for discovering new lands. Little did Leif know that he discovered a new continent for his European people. Though significantly less is known about the Americas, some historians believe that at the time, a similar type of expansion happened in the American continent, like in Europe. Sadly, we just don't have the historical records from this unique period. We know that the Mayans down in South America were building the impressive cities of Tikal, Palenque, and Chichen Itza, having a population of anywhere between 2 and 10 million. We also know that there were various tribes across the north, including the Cherokee, the Navajo, and the Inuits. The Inuits are most likely to have interacted with Leif's fleet. While back in Europe, in the holy city of Jerusalem laid the very famous church, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. According to Christian belief, this church was built on the day Jesus was crucified and resurrected. However, in 1009 AD, Arab Caliph al-Hakim ordered the destruction of this sacred holy site. All of the sacred sites were destroyed, leaving them completely annihilated. When the news reached Europe, Christians were horrified. Pope Sergius IV sent a circular letter to all churches, calling for a holy fight in the Middle East and the expulsion of Muslims from the Holy Land. But yet the Arabs of the Abbasid Caliphate would actually be expelled by another before Jerusalem. The Seljuk Turks, a Central Asian Turkic people of the Muslim faith, were beginning to grow their empire. In 1055, they took over the Abbasid Caliphate capital city of Baghdad. The Seljuk Turks initially respected the caliph, but the Seljuks took over the city over time. In 1076, they captured Medina, followed the next year by the capturing of Mecca, the holiest city in Islam. Due to this, the Muslim world wasn't ready for Pope Urban II at the Council of Clermont in 1095 to call upon all Christians to take up arms and liberate the Holy Land from Muslim rule. The Pope promised spiritual rewards and forgiveness of sins to those who joined the crusade, and many knights, nobles, and peasants were inspired to take up the cause. Many European nobles, such as Godfrey of Bouillon, Toulouse, Bohemond of Taranto, and Robert of Flanders, brought their armies from Europe on their journey to Jerusalem. While the Christians were united, the Muslims were divided and unable to put up a strong defense against the Crusaders. Hence, the Christians took over the county of Edessa in 1098, and finally the holy city of Jerusalem in 1099. However, the crusade wasn't done. In 1144, the Muslim forces led by Turkish ruler Ahmad ad-Din Zengi launched a siege against Edessa. The city was poorly defended, and the Crusaders could not resist the Muslim forces for long. After a siege of several weeks, the city was breached, and the Muslim forces overran the city, killing or enslaving much of the population. But the Christians weren't happy with that, so in 1147, the massive armies of Europe came back with attempts to free Edessa. The Crusaders faced significant logistical challenges, including shortages of food and supplies. They were also plagued by infighting and political rivalries, which called the campaign to be in ruin after the disastrous loss of the Battle of Anab in 1149, which resulted in the capture of King Louis VII and the loss of much of the Crusader army. While the Christians and Muslims were fighting, the Hindus in the Khmer Empire, under King Suryavarman II, built a fantastic temple for the Hindu god Vishnu called the Angkor Wat. Vishnu is an important god in Hinduism, known as the preserver and protector of the universe. He has 10 incarnations, or avatars, and is often depicted as having blue skin and holding 4 objects. As you approach Angkor Wat, you are greeted by a massive moat and a grand entrance gate adorned with intricate carvings of mythological creatures and deities. The main temple rises like a towering mountain, with intricate carvings and reliefs that tell the stories of Hindu mythology and the history of the Khmer Empire. The temple's galleries are lined with stunning bas-reliefs depicting scenes of battles, ceremonies, and daily life in ancient Cambodia. At the heart of the complex is the central sanctuary, a massive pyramid-like structure surrounded by smaller temples and courtyards. The sanctuary is considered the most sacred part of the temple, adorned with intricately carved statues and images of Hindu gods and goddesses. It was an incredible feat of human ingenuity. But yet in 1187, the Muslim commander from Egypt, Saladin, became fed up with the Christian rule of Jerusalem. So he declared a holy war across the Muslim world in order to reconquer Jerusalem from the Christians. The battle occurred on a scorching hot day in the hills near the Sea of Galilee. Saladin's forces numbered around 20,000. The Crusaders had a much smaller force of around 12,000 knights, soldiers, and civilians under the aptly named king, King Guy. The battle began with skirmishes between the two sides, but soon escalated into a full-scale engagement. Saladin's forces could use their superior cavalry to encircle the Crusaders, who could not break through the Muslim lines. The heat and thirst soon took a toll on the Crusaders, who were weakened and disoriented. The Muslim forces took advantage of the situation. They launched a fierce attack, breaking through the Crusader lines and capturing many knights. King Guy and a small group of knights were able to escape the battlefield. Still, the majority of the Crusader army was destroyed. The loss of the battle was a severe blow to the Christian forces in the region, and it paved the way for Saladin's conquest of Jerusalem. But the Christians weren't going to allow that. So, guess what happened? Another crusade. This time, the 3 most powerful monarchs at the time, Emperor Frederick I of the Holy Roman Empire, King Richard I of England, and King Philip II of France, sent their best armies to reconquer the holy city of Jerusalem. However, all the force in the world couldn't retake Jerusalem from the grips of Saladin, leaving the Third Crusade to be a failure. Genghis was born to a mother kidnapped by his father and forced into marriage. Legend holds that he came into this world clutching a blood clot in his right hand. Before he turned 10, his father was poisoned to death by an enemy clan. Genghis's clan then deserted him, his mother, and his 6 siblings to avoid having to feed them. However, he soon began to make friends with the other clans throughout the Mongolian mountainside. By 1206, he had united all the various tribes, uniting 1 million people. For the time, Genghis was quite progressive. He made it illegal to sell and kidnap women, banished the idea of enslavement of any Mongol, and even allowed freedom of religion. When it came to war, though, Genghis was as barbaric as the next one. His first campaign was against the Shisha kingdom in 1209. His army of mostly cavalrymen on horses quickly outnumbered and destroyed the kingdom. His next target was the Jin dynasty in China. From 1211 to 1214, the outnumbered Mongols ravaged the countryside, causing food shortages, resulting in the Jin army killing tens of thousands of their own peasants just so their elites could live. In 1214, the Mongols besieged the capital of Zhongdu, now Beijing, and burnt it to the ground. In the early 13th century, King John was facing increasing pressure from his barons, who were demanding greater rights and protections under the law. In response to their demands, John agreed to meet with the barons and negotiate a settlement. The result of these negotiations was the Magna Carta, a document that set out a series of rights and freedoms that the king could not violate. Among these rights were the right to a fair trial, the right to due process of law, and the right to be protected from arbitrary arrest and imprisonment. The Magna Carta also established the principle of habeas corpus, which required the government to produce a prisoner in court and provide a lawful reason for their detention. This principle has been a cornerstone of modern legal systems around the world. Then in 1217, there was another crusade, this time led by King Andrew II of Hungary and Duke Leopold VI of Austria, with the same goal in mind: to take over Jerusalem. The Crusaders successfully captured the city of Damietta in 1219, but they could not advance further into Egypt. After a series of setbacks, including capture and imprisonment of many Crusaders, the Christian forces were forced to abandon their campaign in Egypt. The Crusaders eventually agreed to a treaty with the Muslim forces, allowing them to leave Egypt unharmed, but without achieving their ultimate goal. Genghis Khan wasn't done though. In 1219, went to war against the Khwarezm Empire in present-day Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, Afghanistan, and Iran. During his raids, the Mongol hordes swept through one city after another, taking over the likes of Bukhara, Samarkand, and Urgench. Skilled workers such as carpenters and jewelers were usually saved, while aristocrats and resisting soldiers were killed. Unskilled workers, meanwhile, were often used as human shields during the next assault. No one knows with any certainty how many people died during Genghis Khan's wars, in part because the Mongols propagated their vicious image as a way of spreading terror. At Genghis Khan's death, he controlled a massive territory from the Sea of Japan to the Caspian Sea. However, even more impressively, around 8% of the men in South Asia descend from Genghis Khan today. In 1228, Emperor Frederick II of the Holy Roman Empire tried to conquer the Holy Land, but failed, ending the Sixth Crusade. Of course, the Holy Roman Empire couldn't be the only one crusading. King Louis IX of France in 1248 decided to start the Seventh Crusade to retake Jerusalem, but he was taken prisoner by the Muslims and forced to pay a hefty ransom as he retreated. However, that didn't deter King Louis IX, because in 1270 he was at it again, trying to free Jerusalem from the grips of Muslim rule, but this time he died of dysentery. Once King Louis IX died, his troops retreated, creating the 8th and final time there was a crusade. In England, though, in 1295, England was making a diplomatic headway. In a letter summoning Parliament, King Edward I wrote, "Since the most righteous law of the emperors ordains that what touches all should be approved by all, So it appears that common dangers should be met by remedies agreed upon in common. As King Edward, I would then request 1/10 of the incomes of nobles and 1/11 of the income of knights, creating one of the first parliaments we would see in the New Age. While down in Africa, a leader of extravagant wealth, Mansa Musa, was gaining power. On his famous Hajj, a religious Muslim pilgrimage to Mecca that every Muslim should make at least once in his life, Mansa Musa, with his caravan of camels and an army of scholars, gave vast amounts of gold to any poor person he saw, hence crashing all of the economies in northern Africa due to the inflation of gold. When Mansa Musa returned to Mali, he made it his life purpose to make Timbuktu the Muslim capital of knowledge. So Mansa Musa invested heavily in building the University of Sankore. Various Islamic faith scholars quickly made their way to Sankore to study Islamic theology, law, and literature with over 1 million manuscripts. Mansa Musa was also a very religious man with a policy that he commissioned a new mosque every Friday. However, sadly though, only the Djinguereber Mosque in Timbuktu stood the test of time. In the Americas though, another built on riches was being created. As Aztec legend has it, the god Huitzilopochtli directed them to build where they saw an eagle perched on a cactus, eating a snake. When they saw this exact scene on an island located in what was once Lake Texcoco, they interpreted it as a sign from their god, and founded Tenochtitlan on that island. As time passed, Tenochtitlan started to build impressive temples such as the Great Temple. The Great Temple comprised of 2 main structures, dedicated to the gods Huitzilopochtli and Tlaloc. The city itself was most fascinating. It was designed with a complex system of canals and causeways to help control flooding and facilitate transport across the city, while they started to farm on floating gardens known as chinampas on the shallow waters of Lake Texcoco, which were used to grow crops such as maize, beans, and squash. As Mali and the Aztecs were building their cities, England and France were in war for 100 years. The origins of the conflict lay with the status of the Duchy of Guyenne. In basic capitalistic terms, this was owned by the British Crown. However, the land itself was in France. The second reason was that the last direct descendant of Charlemagne, King Charles IV, died in 1328. So the next closest relative was Edward III, the King of England. So King Edward III claimed the rule of France in 1337, which was not liked by the French people. As the petty, erratic 100 Years' War raged on, the people of the world had to face a pandemic like no other, the bubonic plague. As the Italian poet Giovanni Boccaccio wrote, at the beginning of the malady, certain swellings either on the groin or under the armpits waxed to the bigness of a common apple, others to the size of an egg, some more and some less, and these the vulgar named plague boils. Historians believe this pandemic was spread by rats traveling through ships across Europe and merchants throughout the Silk Road. No matter how this plague was produced, around 75 to 200 million people died. With the death of so many people, especially the poor, landowners and nobles were required to allow farmers to keep more of the product they farmed, leading to more workers' rights. In China, though, a group of rebels known as the Red Turbans revolted against the Mongol rulers of China. The Red Turbans were led by a man named Zhu Yanzhong, born into a poor peasant family. Zhu built a strong following among the rebel forces, and eventually emerged as their leader. In 1368, Zhu declared himself emperor and established the Ming Dynasty, marking the beginning of a new era in Chinese history. In 1428, at the age of 16, Joan left her home in the village of Domremy and traveled to the court of Charles VII, where she asked for permission to lead the French army against the English. At first, her request was met with skepticism and disbelief. Still, Joan persisted and eventually won the support of the French commanders. Joan's first major military victory came in the Siege of Orleans in 1429. She led the French troops in a series of daring attacks on the English forces, and she broke the siege and liberated the city. This victory boosted French morale and helped to turn the tide of the war in their favor. Over the next several months, Joan led the French army to victories against the English, including the Battle of Patay in June 1429. However, her success also made her enemies in the English and French court. In 1430, she was captured by the English and put on trial for heresy and witchcraft. Joan was subjected to a grueling trial. She was accused of various crimes, including dressing in men's clothing, practicing sorcery, and hearing voices. Despite the odds against her, Joan remained steadfast in her faith and her belief that she was carrying out God's will. In the end, Joan was found guilty and sentenced to death by burning at stake. She was executed on May 30th, 1431 at 19. Then, 20 years later, in the Battle of Castilian, Charles VII of France led a French army which defeated the English army, effectively ending English territorial claims in France. While back in the great city of Constantinople, the Byzantine Empire was declining, weakened by years of war, political instability, and economic turmoil. In contrast, the Ottoman Empire, led by Sultan Mehmed II, was on the rise, and the Sultan saw an opportunity to expand his empire and gain control of the strategic city of Constantinople. By 1453, Mehmed II led an army of 80,000 soldiers, including elite Janissary troops and a powerful artillery force, to besiege Constantinople. The Byzantine defenders, led by Emperor Constantine XI, were vastly outnumbered and outgunned. They faced a seemingly impossible task to hold off the Ottoman assault. The Ottomans bombarded the city with artillery for nearly 2 months, causing extensive damage to the walls and fortifications. The Byzantine defenders, meanwhile, struggled to maintain morale and keep their troops fed and supplied. Then, on the fateful day, May 29, 1453, the Ottomans launched a massive assault on the city. Climbing up, covered by siege towers, they were able to breach the walls and gain access to the city. Despite putting up a valiant defense, the Byzantine defenders were overwhelmed, and the Ottomans were able to storm the city and capture the capital, causing the Great Byzantine Empire to fall. In 1453, all paths no longer led to Rome, and all traces back to the empire of Caesar were erased. It was replaced by the beginning of utter Ottoman domination in the region, ushering in a new era of Turkish power and influence in the Mediterranean. While the Byzantines might have been falling, the Russians were finally gaining their independence. At the time, the Mongol Empire was ruling over Russia, demanding that various Russian towns pay tribute or face the wrath of the Mongols. However, in 1472, Ivan the Great refused to pay such tribute. Over the next several years, he built up his military strength and was able to drive out the Mongol garrisons from various cities and towns throughout Russia. In 1480, the Mongols demanded that Ivan pay tribute or face military action, but after a tense standoff, they finally retreated. Ivan's victory was the beginning of a free Russia and the decline of the Mongolian Empire. Then in 1492, as Christopher Columbus sailed the ocean blue, the Europeans discovered the New World. Set initially on finding a path to India, instead he landed on an island in the Bahamas, which he aptly named San Salvador. When he and his crew set up camp, he met the Lucayans, skilled fishermen and farmers, who welcomed him and his crew and provided them with food and supplies. While back in Europe, a golden age of culture was upon us. In 1503, Leonardo da Vinci painted the Mona Lisa. Da Vinci's biographer, Walter Isaacson, says, "The Mona Lisa, to me, is the greatest emotional painting ever done. The way the smile flickers makes it a work of art and science because Leonardo understood optics, the muscles of the lips, and how light strikes the eye. All of it goes into making the Mona Lisa's smile so mysterious and elusive. In 1504, Michelangelo sculpted David. Michelangelo would say, "In every block of marble, I see a statue as plain as though it stood before me, shaped in perfect in attitude and action. I have only to hew away the rough walls that imprison the lovely apparition to reveal it to the other eyes as mine see it." While in 1506, Michelangelo was painting the magnificent painting of the Sistine Chapel. While in the political world, Niccolo Machiavelli is one of, if not the most influential, pieces of literature we have today. The Prince is a political manifesto that comments on the past civilizations we've heard about in this video. Machiavelli writes, "It is much safer to be feared than loved, because love is preserved by the link of obligation, which, owing to the baseness of men, is broken at every opportunity for their advantage. But fear preserves you by a dread of punishment which never fails." Think about the ordinary farmer. Think about the man who spends generations of their life farming, giving heavy taxes to a noble lord for doing nothing except protecting them. Why won't the farmers rebel? It's because they're afraid of what would happen without their leaders. Without the elites, the Huns or the Mongols can come to your farm and destroy you on their own. So you live in fear as to what might happen to you, leaving you to give your wheat to said leader. Martin Luther, though, didn't just report on the basics of human nature. Martin wanted to make a difference and was sick of the Catholic Church. At the time, the Catholic Church was selling indulgences, which were certificates that people could purchase to reduce the amount of time they would spend in purgatory after they died. Luther believed this practice was corrupt and went against the Bible's teachings, which emphasized the importance of repentance and faith over material wealth. In protest, he wrote a series of 95 theses, or arguments, challenging the Church's authority and calling for reform. On October 31st, 1517, Luther nailed his 95 theses to the door of the castle church in Wittenberg, which was a common way of announcing a public debate or discussion. Luther's 95 Theses sparked a debate within the church and among European scholars and theologians. Some people agreed with his criticisms of the church, while others saw him as a heretic and a threat to the established order. The beginning of Protestantism was upon us. In 1519, though, the Spanish conquistadors, under the leadership of Hernan Cortés, arrived on the Aztec shores. They were greeted by the Aztecs, who gave gifts of gold and silver of incredible wealth to the Spanish, as they believed that the Spaniards were emissaries of the god Quetzalcoatl. However, Cortés soon revealed his true intentions: to conquer the Aztec Empire and claim its wealth for Spain. Over several years, Cortés and his forces engaged in a series of battles with the Aztecs, marked by intense violence and brutality. The Spanish were aided by their superior military technology, including guns and cannons, and by the support of indigenous allies, who were the enemies of the Aztecs. Despite being vastly outnumbered, Cortés and his men made significant gains against the Aztecs, eventually laying siege to their capital city of Tenochtitlan. After months of fighting, the city fell to the Spanish in 1521, and the Aztec Empire was effectively destroyed. Then, following the strategy of Cortés, Francisco Pizarro led an expedition that conquered the Incan Empire in present-day Peru. Though the violence was authoritarian, the biohazards were even more demanding. The Europeans, due to having survived illnesses such as the bubonic plague and smallpox, developed immunity to many of these diseases that they've, one way or another, spread to the native people, essentially over time, killing them off. Under Suleiman the Magnificent's leadership, the Ottoman Empire became one of the most powerful and influential empires in world history. Suleiman was a brilliant strategist and military leader, and his reign was marked by significant conquests and political achievements. Like many other leaders, he set out to conquer the world. By the end of his reign, Suleiman the Magnificent presided over a vast empire that stretched from southeastern Europe to the deserts of Arabia and from the shores of the Mediterranean to the plains of Persia. His conquests included the capture of Belgrade and Budapest in Europe, Jerusalem and Mecca in the Middle East, and Tabriz and Baghdad in Persia. The Ottomans also became the dominant naval power in the Mediterranean, with control over North African cities such as Algiers and Tunis, creating the dominant Ottoman civilization. But yet, all things fall when one is in love, and the murder-happy King Henry had fallen in love with Anne Boleyn and was desperate to marry her. However, Catherine of Aragon was still alive, and the Catholic Church did not recognize divorce. Henry's solution was to break away from the Catholic Church and established the Church of England, with himself as the head. In 1534, Henry passed the Act of Supremacy, which declared that the king, not the Pope, was the supreme head of the Church of England, leaving the Catholic Church to be angry and excommunicate Henry VII, leaving a schism between the Church of England and the Catholic Church even today. Ivan the Terrible is now the ruler of Russia. In the early years of his reign, Ivan enjoyed significant success, launching military campaigns against neighboring kingdoms and expanding Russia's borders. He also oversaw the construction of magnificent public works, including St. Basil's Cathedral in Moscow. However, as Ivan grew older, he became increasingly paranoid and erratic. He launched a series of brutal purges and executions, targeting anyone he perceived as threatening his power. He also had a volatile temper, lashing out at advisors and nobles who dared to question his decisions. In 1560, Ivan suffered a devastating personal loss when his beloved wife Anastasia died. This event seems to have triggered a significant psychological breakdown, and Ivan became increasingly unstable and violent. He launched a series of bloody campaigns against his own people, including the notorious Oprichnina, a campaign of terror and repression that killed thousands of Russians and destroyed countless homes and families, truly deserving of the name Terrible. While Russia was going through that, England was on the rise with the start of the English Renaissance under the leadership of Queen Elizabeth I. Elizabethan playwrights dominated the scene, creating written words that were poetic in language and poignant in meaning. They've even written plays about people we've already talked about. William Shakespeare wrote many plays, including Histories, Julius Caesar, which was about the assassination of Julius Caesar, King John, which was about the 100 Years' War, and Henry VII was a play about showing human needs to gain power. Other notable playwrights who filled the scene were Christopher Marlowe, Ben Jonson, and John Webster. While on the other side of the world, the English colony of Jamestown was forming in Virginia, under the Virginia Trading Company. Slightly up north, Samuel de Champlain was establishing the French colony of Quebec in Canada. While back in the Old World, they were having a new era of fighting, the 30 Years' War. This time, it was between the Protestants and the Catholics. It began in 1618 when the Holy Roman Emperor attempted to impose Catholicism on the Protestant population of Bohemia. The Bohemians rebelled, and soon the conflict spread throughout the region. Over the next 30 years, armies marched and counter-marched across Europe, leaving a trail of destruction and devastation. The war was characterized by brutal sieges, bloody battles, and atrocities committed by both sides. At its height, the war involved most of the major powers of Europe, including France, Spain, Sweden, and the Holy Roman Empire. It was fought along religious, political, and economic lines, with each side vying for dominance and control. The war finally ended in 1648 with the signing of the Peace of Westphalia. The treaty recognized the Dutch Republic's independence, established the individual state's sovereignty within the Holy Roman Empire, and ended the religious conflicts that fueled the war. While in China, the Ming court was plagued by corruption, factionalism, and economic decline. The emperor at the time, Chongzhen, faced mounting pressure from his advisors to strengthen the military and defend against the Manchu threat. However, his efforts were hindered by infighting among officials and a lack of resources. In 1644, the Manchu army, led by Prince Dorgon, launched a massive invasion of China. The Ming army, weakened by years of neglect and corruption, was no match for the highly disciplined and skilled Manchu forces. The Manchus quickly conquered Beijing and installed their puppet emperor, ending the Ming dynasty, continuing the cycle of dynasties in China. Restore the Scottish monarchy and independence. Then, on July 4th, 1776, a group of American patriots stood in a room in Philadelphia, signing a document that would say the words, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." War in the Americas was on. But back in Europe, the tone was quite different. Adam Smith published the famous book, The Wealth of Nations, the foundations of laissez-faire economics, which essentially says the market would balance itself out over time. In Austria, Mozart was performing his magnum opus, the Hafner Serenade. Mozart's Hafner Serenade is a charming and elegant work featuring courtly dance music and light, lyrical melodies. Its graceful melodies, subtle harmonies, and elegant instrumental writing characterize it. As the war continued, King George III sent his armies of the masses over to America. Though the colonists had little military training, their knowledge of the terrain and guerrilla tactics made them nearly invisible. At the same time, the Red Army coats were easy to see for the Americans. In the summer of 1781, George Washington and French General Rochambeau marched their forces south to Virginia, where they laid siege to Cornwallis and his army at Yorktown. The British were trapped and could not escape by land or sea. The siege dragged on for weeks. The American and French forces bombarded the British with artillery. They dug trenches to inch their way closer to the British defenses. The French Navy defeated the British Navy in a crucial naval battle off the coast of Virginia, cutting off Cornwallis's only escape route by sea. On October 14, 1781, the American and French forces launched a massive assault on the British defenses. The British fought valiantly, but were vastly outnumbered and outgunned, and they soon began to falter. On October 19th, Cornwallis surrendered his army to Washington, effectively ending the war. The victory at Yorktown was a decisive moment in the war, and it marked the end of British rule in America and the beginning of a new experiment. With America finally being free from the totally tyrannical grips of Britain, they had one issue. How were they going to lead? Were they going to make General George Washington their monarch? Therefore, democracy was chosen. However, Plato made a good point many years ago, that the common man was incapable and not wise enough to pick a better leader to lead them to success. So the American-founded Constitutional Convention came up with this idea of the Electoral College, where the common man would vote for a particular person who would then have a say in who could be president. So instead of the president being directly voted on by the people, they would vote on elites, who would then vote for the president directly. The French then noticed how well the American Revolution went. At the time, the French were ruled by King Louis XVI and his wife, Queen Marie Antoinette. As Queen Marie Antoinette told the peasants, "Let them eat cake," the people of France got together. They decided they wanted more say in how the country was run, and they formed a group called the National Assembly and started making new laws to give them more rights. One of the most famous events of the French Revolution was the storming of the Bastille. This was a prison that represented the king's power, and the people wanted to show that they were not afraid of him. They broke into the prison and freed the prisoners, which started a revolution throughout France. Many influential people lost their heads during the revolution, including King Louis XVI and his wife, Queen Marie Antoinette. The people were tired of being ruled by a king and queen who didn't care about them, and they wanted to create a new system where everyone would have a say. And the people of France voted in Maximilien Robespierre. In 1789, Robespierre was elected as a delegate to the Estates General, which was convened to address France's financial crisis. He quickly emerged as a leading voice in the National Assembly, advocating for the ordinary people's rights and opposing the aristocracy's power. As the revolution continued, though, Robespierre became increasingly radical in his views, advocating for the execution of King Louis XVI and the establishment of a republic. He was elected to the powerful Committee of Public Safety in 1793, tasked with protecting the revolution and rooting out enemies of the state. Under Robespierre's leadership, the committee launched a period of intense repression known as the Reign of Terror. Thousands of people were arrested, tried, and executed for crimes against the revolution. Robespierre became known as a ruthless and uncompromising figure. However, Robespierre's power began to wane as the people grew tired of the violence and the instability of the revolution. In 1794, he was arrested and imprisoned along with his closest allies. On July 28, 1794, Robespierre was taken to the guillotine and executed. The execution marked the end of the Reign of Terror and democracy for now in France. Instead, they moved to a directory. A directory is a government led by a 5-member executive council, known as the Directory, which was chosen by the Council of Elders. This legislative body was also part of the new government. The Directory was meant to serve as a moderating force, balancing the interests of the various factions that had emerged during the revolution. However, the Directory concept wasn't successful as well. So General Napoleon Bonaparte decided to overthrow the government and begin his conquests to take over the world. So off Napoleon went to conquer much of Europe. In 1805, Napoleon defeated a combined Austro-Russian army at the Battle of Austerlitz, solidifying his position as one of Europe's most powerful leaders. He then conquered much of the continent, including Spain, Portugal, and the Netherlands. In 1812, Napoleon invaded Russia with a massive army. Still, the campaign proved disastrous, and his forces were decimated by the harsh Russian winter. The defeat marked the beginning of Napoleon's downfall. In 1814, the European powers allied against Napoleon and invaded France, forcing him to abdicate his throne and go into exile on the island of Elba. However, he returned to France in 1815 in what became known as the 100 Days, and briefly regained power before being defeated by the British and Prussian armies at the Battle of Waterloo. Right after the writing of the Communist Manifesto began a period in Europe known as the Scramble for Africa. It all began in the 1870s when European countries began to explore the interior of Africa, looking for new territories to claim and resources to exploit. At first, the European powers were cautious, sending explorers and missionaries into Africa to establish trade networks and alliances with local leaders. However, as competition increased, the European powers became more aggressive in their tactics. They used military force to establish colonies and protectorates, and they engaged in diplomatic maneuvering and propaganda campaigns to gain the support of local populations. One of the most ruthless tactics the European powers used was dividing Africa into artificial borders and creating new ethnic and linguistic divisions. This created tensions and conflicts between different African groups, which the Europeans used to their advantage, creating a European stronghold over the continent of Africa to increase their profits. The scramble for Africa came to an end as a result of several factors, including changing international politics, economic realities, and rising African nationalism. One of the key factors that contributed to the end of the scramble for Africa was the changing balance of power in Europe. By the early 20th century, European powers were increasingly focused on competition with each other, particularly in Europe itself, and were less interested in acquiring new colonies in Africa. This was due in part to the growing tensions between European powers that would eventually lead to the outbreak of World War I in 1914. Because on June 28, 1914, a shot was heard around the world with the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand. Franz Ferdinand was the heir to the throne of Austria-Hungary, and his assassination by a Serbian nationalist named Gavrilo Princip sparked a diplomatic crisis that quickly escalated into a global conflict. In the aftermath of the assassination, Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia, triggering a complex web of alliances and treaties that drew other countries into the conflict. Germany, an ally of Austria-Hungary, declared war on Russia and France, while Great Britain, which had a treaty with Belgium, declared war on Germany. Within weeks, most of Europe was embroiled in a brutal and devastating conflict. In November 1918, after 4 years of brutal fighting, the Allied powers and the Central Powers agreed to an armistice, effectively bringing an end to the war and the demise of the Ottoman Empire. On November 11th, the armistice went into effect, and the guns fell silent across Europe. World War II. The peace was short-lived because a man named Adolf Hitler invaded Poland. Like Alexander the Great, Julius Caesar, Trajan, Attila the Hun, Genghis Khan, Napoleon Bonaparte, and Suleiman the Great, Adolf Hitler wanted to establish an empire for his nation and his people. Adolf had dreams of building an empire larger than anything that was ever created. He wanted to make the Roman Empire look like nothing. However, for the sake of the world, and especially those Hitler viewed as undesirable vermin, in April 1945, Soviet forces began a massive assault on Berlin. After weeks of intense fighting, the city fell on May 2nd, and German forces surrendered. Meanwhile, Allied forces were closing in from the west, and on May 7th, Germany signed an unconditional surrender, officially ending the war in Europe. A few months later, after the bombings of Nagasaki and Hiroshima, Japan surrendered as well, leaving the war to be over. From World War II on, the world has faced a technological revolution. With Alan Turing's invention of the computer during the war, the world became global. For 50 years, America and the Soviet Union were at war, despite the fact that they were on two totally different continents. In 1969, Neil Armstrong landed on the moon, saying,
"It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind."
As the years on the world has become increasingly smaller, computers have become more affordable. Cell phones changed the way we communicated with one another. Let's go back to the story of a man named Gilgamesh on his quest for immortality. At the end of the poem, Gilgamesh realizes, life, which you look for, you will never find. For when gods created man, they let death be his share, and life withheld in their own hands. The history of human civilizations is an incomplete book, constantly being updated. Some things will never change. However, humans will always die. Empires will always rise and fall. The masses will always clamor towards safety.